Now, this morning we covered some of the big trade issues facing the UK and the global automotive sectors. I'm delighted now to welcome back SMMT Chief Executive Mike Hawes for his view from the bridge, as it were, on some more important considerations and issues for this sector. Of course, trade-related, but also touching elsewhere as well. Now, Mike will have time to answer a couple of your questions at the end of our chat, so do send me anything you want to ask him while Mike and I are chatting. Mike, thank you for coming back and chatting to me. I want to start off this afternoon. We know how important trade with the EU is for the UK auto sector. And as Alessandro was detailing to me earlier this morning, and of course Sigrid, I'm sure, will do soon too. But what I want to ask you about is to elaborate a little bit on trading with established and new partners, so India, the Gulf, US, South Korea, Mexico and Canada, to name just a few. Some new buddies, if you were. What are the opportunities that they present?
Well, I think, as I mentioned this morning, the growth in the automotive industry, the growth in markets is going to be in some of these new territories in Asia and beyond. And, what we've seen over the past few years since Brexit is the UK has sought to establish trade relations with them, and we're fully behind that because we already export UK-produced vehicles, components, to so many of those markets. And we want, as I said, that trade to be free and fair. Kemi Badenoch, Secretary of State, talked about UK's accession to CPTPP, which is a tremendous opportunity, especially with countries like Malaysia, with which we don't currently have a trade agreement. But then you look further afield as well. India is one that's obviously cited. We're in the process of negotiating a trade deal with them. There's been various deadlines, and I think we were reassured, I think when the Secretary of State said it's not so much about the timescale, it's about getting the right deal. Yeah. And that mentality, I think, is important at all the deals. If we're looking at countries like, you mentioned Mexico and Canada, these have a big automotive sector. Not only are they a market, but they're good automotive sectors. So we want to make sure that this is of mutual benefit. The Gulf states and some of these Asian markets, tremendous opportunities, but it's about being free and fair, reflecting the UK automotive industry. Now, if you look at what characterises the UK automotive industry, we're particularly strong in premium, in sports car, luxury, and that often complements what is produced locally. So enabling those small volume manufacturers as well as the large ones to have that reciprocal access is what we hope these trade agreements will provide.
OK, very interesting. I want to turn to China. Obviously, there's a lot of chatter about the geopolitics of that relationship, but I want you to focus us on the trade relationship with China. What does it look like from where you're sitting?
Well, China is, first of all, it's a major investor in the UK automotive industry. It's also, the biggest car market in the world, the biggest producer in the world. So we need to make sure we've got a constructive and fair trading relationship with China. What we've seen over the past few years is the growth of Chinese brands internationally, not just in the UK, but in Europe and elsewhere. We need to make sure that we have access to that market. That's free and fair. But also, I mentioned it this morning. I mean, some of the major markets, there is concern there about the EU's got its state subsidy investigation. The US is raising tariffs on Chinese imports. If you look at the direction of travel of the industry, we are moving to electrification. And at the moment, the production of a lot of those materials is in Chinese hands. We need to build our own resilience in the UK and indeed Europe. So we need to be competitive. If we're competitive, we can compete with China. And certainly, I think, as we've seen the relationship evolve, it needs to continue to develop.
You just mentioned net zero, and obviously we're looking at a rapid shift to zero-emission transport. That's taking place all over the world, not just here where we sit in the UK. Wider net zero ambitions, of course. But how important is that to trade policy and trade agreements if we're really going to try to hit those targets?
I think sort of environmental policy, trade policy and industrial policy are all tied up often in trade negotiations. If we think back to the Brexit deal, the TCA, and what we're talking about today, and is the rules of origin. That reflects those sort of issues because the rationale behind it was to create the framework to grow European and UK domestic battery capability. Critically important, the global industry is moving towards net zero, increasing electrification, maybe hydrogen, other technologies as well. So we need to make sure that the industry, both here, Europe and beyond, is leading that change. It is what countries want, it's what society wants, it's what the globe needs. Trade has the opportunity, the ability to help influence that. We're talking about raw materials, critical minerals, and so forth. You need to make sure that that these trade deals reflect that. And specific on EV, you sort of have that end-to-end arrangement because it is about resources, it is about production, it is about sustainability, remanufacturing. We heard from Mike Haig-Morgan as well. And that is a real growing area because every manufacturer wants to reduce its environmental impact. That's both upstream and downstream. So sustainability, it's not just about what comes out the tailpipe, if you will. It's the whole end-to-end.
It's the whole thing. You just mentioned critical minerals, and I think I'm right in saying that you sit on a Department for Business and Trade Critical Minerals Task Force. And of course, getting your hands on critical minerals is absolutely crucial if industries and businesses are going to be able to compete in this area. So specifically looking at what the UK needs to do in this area, where should the focus be on that area?
Well, I think what you're saying is the focus, there needs to be a strategy.
Yeah.
There's global demand for a lot of these materials. Now, some of the materials we need, like lithium, we can source from the UK. It's underdeveloped and there's room for development, but it's unlikely that that would make us self-sufficient in lithium. And that's just one of these critical minerals. So you need to look at across the board at the minerals we need, and we are sourcing them globally. So the trade angle is trying to make sure we have the right agreements with the right countries that we can supply some of these materials, both raw materials and processed materials. But the other part is about thinking much more about, OK, can we reduce our dependency? I think we're talking about critical minerals. They're not in plentiful supply, otherwise we wouldn't be talking about it. Can we reduce our dependency? And you're seeing the automotive industry, the chemical industry looking at substitutes for some of these, but that's often medium to long term.
Yes, I was going to say, how near is that a possibility?
I mean, the one that's always cited is cobalt. Generally comes from the DRC. Looking for alternatives because that's in very short supply. So how can you both as an industry develop those alternative chemical inputs that are required, but also in the short to medium term, make sure you've got a strategy that secures the supply so you can continue to sustain the industry here as we invest in gigafactories, which the UK has been very successful at in the past few months at least.
And finally, Mike, really moving away off topic, next year the UK introduces a zero emissions vehicle mandate. Now, that is said to be one of the strictest pieces of regulation of its type anywhere in the world. Some people, obviously many people, will applaud that, but it sets out the proportion of EVs that brands must sell in Britain to rise from 22% to a whopping 80% by 2030. We have all seen the government changing tack.
Surely not.
It's been headline news on that issue. Now, together with the potential phase-in of EV tariffs, if a solution to the UK EU rules of origin challenge isn't found, what's the impact going to be? What's worst-case scenario?
Well, what you've just described there is a huge amount of uncertainty still. We don't know the result of the discussions that are ongoing about the rules of origin. We hope pragmatism will resolve the matter and we'll have a sensible solution that avoids it. If you don't, the imposition of tariffs, as we said before, puts additional cost on the manufacturers. Invariably, it's going to be passed through to the consumer, and it makes their product potentially uncompetitive in the market. Now, flip side of that is you either reduce your sales or, for the consumer, they look elsewhere for products. Yet, as you said, at the same time, we have this mandate which compels all brands. It's not an industry average, it is by brand, to sell an increasing proportion of their UK sales to be pure electric. So one of the sessions this afternoon, I think, is carrot and stick. This is a stick.
Yeah.
How can you... We can put the vehicles on the market. You can't compel people to buy them.
So do we need carrot?
We need some more carrots.
Yeah.
A degree of incentives. We have arguably the toughest transition timetable with this requirement of anywhere in the world, but without much in the way of carrots incentives. If you're a business buyer here, there's a tax benefit. If you're a private buyer, we over a year ago now we did in the last of the incentives. We need to make sure the UK gets these models. Other countries in Europe and elsewhere have incentives in place.
This might be a really unfair, googly and maybe two-party political, but obviously we're going to have a general election next year, and it's potentially possible. Some people say very likely there'll be a change in government. Does that mean you might have to change tactic? Do you know what that would look like for the industry, or is it impossible to tell?
I think it's, to a certain extent, what you've seen the changes, we're talking about 2030 to 2035, doesn't change the fundamentals. Most manufacturers, well, if all manufacturers, as far as UK concerned, will be net zero, like just selling zero-emission vehicles, 2035. Some are earlier than that. Some are saying 2030. Some are saying 2025. And it's, that will be a decision that's taken at corporate headquarters globally. The UK is an important global market, but we're only about 2% of global sales. So it is, those industrial strategies reflect what's going on in the UK and elsewhere, whatever happens domestically. And we heard today from Kenny Baynock talking about an automotive strategy forthcoming, which we look forward to. Labour has illustrated one a couple of weeks ago at its conference. We know that whatever government, whatever political hue it is, wants to support this industry. And part of that support has to be about the transition. Yeah.
So we've got a couple of minutes for questions that have come in from the audience. So I'm very, very grateful to anybody that's sent those to me. So the first one, where do people and skills fit into trade deals? How important is it to consider free and fair movement of labour as well as of goods and services?
Yeah, obviously not always part of trade deals, but if you're looking on the basis of an industry, we are interconnected with the rest of the global automotive industry, and especially the European automotive industry. You need to move people about. It's not necessarily about permanent migration, as it were. It's often about short-term. And
presumably plugging a specific hole that needs filling, a specific skills hole.
Yeah, for instance, if you're setting up a gigafactory, you'll fill that shed that you build with plant and machinery. You need to commission that. These are products, these are machinery that's often built elsewhere. You need to come in and get it commissioned. You need service, you need often repair. That's moving people in and out. You're testing vehicles, you need to move them abroad. And that's a good thing because, A, you've got global talent coming in, but also helping British talent get global experience abroad. So, whenever we're talking about trade deals, we also, have to be mindful about the people because, it's the backbone of the entire industry. Without them, you have no industry.
Yeah. And sticking, obviously, with trade, but what about behind-the-border barriers to trade? What can be done to address those?
That, again, when we think about... I mentioned before that the UK is particularly strong on premium luxury sports car manufacturing. By definition, these are expensive vehicles to produce. They command a higher cost. Some markets have luxury taxes on these types of vehicles, which is one of those sort of behind-the-border taxes. They're obviously not part of a trade deal, but they're part and parcel about market access, if you will, some of these non-tariff barriers. So again, when we're looking at the trade, looking at the tariff, we have to look at rules of origin, you have to look at the tariffs, but also try and take account of any non-tariff barriers that are there, because the bottom line is it needs to be free and fair. We, as the UK, have a particular strength in that type of vehicle, and that can often complement what is being produced abroad.
OK, very interesting. Well, Mike, thank you so much for answering those questions. Much appreciated.